안녕하세요, 여러분의 한국어 선생님 고빌리입니다. Welcome to the 8th and final part of my analysis series where I take a look at the 8-member group Stray Kids. If this is somehow your first time seeing me, you must be a massive IN fan, or you just missed out on the other 7 videos I made about Stray Kids. But I'm a Korean teacher who's been studying Korean for over 2 decades and teaching it here on YouTube for over 13 years. And in the last video, I took an in-depth look at Seung-min, so today I'm going to introduce you to IN.
Hello, my name is Ian. I'm from America.
취미는 뭐예요?
취미요? Listen to music.
So good.
Thank you. No problem.
좋은데요? How are you?
I'm good. And you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
누나 발음 너무 섹시해요.
나도 내가 섹시한 거 알아.
And I'm going to be analyzing how he sounds in Korean overall, including his voice tone, pronunciation, intonation, any dialect that he uses, and he does, as well as any filler words or common expressions that he uses, and take a look at his handwriting. And these will be mostly things that you're missing out on if you don't already speak Korean. But once more, I have to thank my Patreon supporters for helping to keep the lights on. I'm just one Korean teacher, so if you're able to support me by joining my Patreon page, it really goes a long way. It helps me to keep making more content like this, as well as more Korean lessons. So please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/GoBillyKorean. And you watching, I know that you're a big fan of IN, and I know that you want to start learning Korean so you can watch his videos without subtitles, but you don't know where to start. Well, look no further than my textbook series, Korean Made Simple, which I made for anyone to start learning Korean by themselves. And it goes all the way up to an intermediate level. You'll also learn about Korean culture, history, and food in each chapter. And all of these books come with audio files that you can download from my website. There's a link to the first book in the video description below, so get your copy today and start learning Korean. Okay, now let's get into my full analysis of IN, whose Korean name is jeong-in.
안녕하세요. 저는 스트레이 키즈 막내 IN입니다.
His last name, Yang, is interesting because it's one of the only 3 Korean last names that originally comes from Jeju Island. Random fact. So, IN was born in 2001 in the city of Busan, where he lived all the way until he moved to Seoul in high school when he became a trainee at JYP Entertainment. Busan is actually the city where I lived when I first went to Korea and where I originally learned to speak Korean. Before joining Stray Kids though, he also enjoyed singing, and when he was young, he used to occasionally sing trot music at his church talent shows, and he seems to really like trot music. Now, for those of you who don't know, trot is basically Korea's traditional pop music, and it was originally influenced by older American and Japanese songs, especially from the early and mid-1900s. And if you want to really impress an older Korean person, try singing a trot song for them next time.
수많은 밤을
좋다. 간다.
으려내는
월수.
아픔에 젖어.
구수해.
So in Stray Kids, IN is one of the main vocalists along with Seung-min. He sounds really good. He's also the 막내 in the group, meaning the youngest member. Note that this word is pronounced as 막내. Okay, so before I go in depth about his Korean, let's talk a bit about my first impressions. My very first impression was that he is playful. Most of the time he has a smile on his face and he seems like he's always in such a good mood.
청바지를 입었습니다. 오늘 다니기 흑청. 흑청. 예. 안 떨어지고. 바로 확인했으니까 안 떨어지고.
But that was only my impression for about a few minutes, because once you hear him speak and see how he behaves, I'd say that a better word to describe IN is actually mature. Here's a clip where he's just talking, but he just gives off such a mature vibe to me.
오랜만에 오고 점장. 매형 만나러 가는 자리 겁나 어색하다.
He seems like this young member who on the outside is really playful and likes to smile, but at the same time, he's always composed. He's smiling and playful, but he's calm. So that's why I feel like he's mature. At least a lot more mature than I expected for him being the youngest member. In fact, Seung-min also shares this same opinion, and I found a clip where he describes Ayan as a 형 같은 동생. So first, let's take a look.
옛날에는 귀엽기만 했다면 요새는 형 같은 동생. 이때부터 어른이 됐어.
So the term is 형 같은 동생. It's just something that Seung-min says. And 형 means an older brother and 동생 means a younger sibling. So he's saying that Ayan feels like a older brother who's younger brother but feels like an older brother. And I agree. I think that Ayan acts older than his age. Even in older clips that I found of him.
몸이 힘들 때 뭔가 항상 힘든 거 감추고 싶어요. 그냥 웃고만 다니는 게 좀 너무 힘들어서.
It just seems like he was already mature even back when he first debuted in the survival show. And in that same episode, Han actually said that Ayan is a really thoughtful person.
정인이 수업 진짜 맞죠? 그러네요. 그러네요.
Okay, those are my first impressions. So then how does Ayan speak Korean? Well, I think that his Korean is also a big part of what I think makes him seem mature. It's also his soft voice and his polite way of speaking. So let's first talk then about his polite speech. And I have an example of him speaking extremely politely here.
진짜 양아치다. 이런 게 어딨어? 나 얘기했는데. 얘야, 너 일본에 자고 싶어? 닥쳐!
Okay, maybe that wasn't the best example, but I first wanted to say that all of the members can speak casually with each other most of the time. Even Ayan, who's the youngest member, can still speak casually with the other older members when he wants to, simply because their environment is more like a family than just regular friends. Like, here's a quick clip of Ayan speaking casually together with Felix, who was born a year earlier than him. And you can hear that it's casual because you won't hear any yo at the end of their sentences, which is typically a polite verb ending.
근데 만약에 했다고 쳐? 그만큼 퀄리티가 나와?
퀄리티가 사실은 안 나와. 그래도 했다?
약간 이건 있는
것 같아.
But most of the time when they're not joking around, he still speaks politely to the other members who are older than him. Like in this clip where he uses the yo form, which is that polite verb ending, but he also uses the 니다 form, which is typically a more formal verb ending. So first, let's watch that clip once and then I'll talk about it.
둘이 아니면 따로 같이 시간을 보낸 적이 있는지.
따로 같이 시간 보낸 적은 한 번 있어요.
한 번 있어요. 데뷔하고 한 6, 7년 있었는데.
아, 그건 아닌데.
한 번 있어요?
제일 최근에 한 번 있었어요.
아, 제일 최근에 한 번 있었구나.
뭐지? 둘이서 새벽에 잠이 안 와가지고
네.
깨어있는 사람 해가지고 저 그때 깨어있었거든요. 잠이 안 와가지고. 그래가지고 새벽에 같이 한강 가가지고 라면 먹었습니다.
언제요?
그게 언젠지가 기억이 안 나요.
최근이라고 하셨는데.
그게 제일 최근일 거예요.
Now, he does something interesting because using the yo form in this situation where Chang-min is also using it would be the norm. It's not extra polite, it's because they both want it to sound kind of like a talk show, so they're both speaking respectfully. And Chang-min is also using the yo form, but what's interesting is that in order to be just a little bit more polite than Chang-min, Ayan actually switches to using the 니다 form in some of his sentences.
그래가지고 새벽에 같이 한강 가가지고 라면 먹었습니다.
And the 니다 form is definitely more of a formal ending. It's for like giving speeches or for some types of business, and it just sounds extra respectful. Or here's a clip of Bangchan actually teasing Ayan and telling him that his clothes are too revealing, too attractive. And Ayan replies using the yo form, saying, "No, it's not."
이현아, 너무 야해. 이현아, 너무 야해.
And it's not like he's only using polite speech to everyone or using formal speech often, but the fact that he does try to speak just a little bit politely means that he prefers to treat his older brothers more respectfully. But a larger thing that also makes him sound mature overall, I think, is his voice tone. In the last video, I mentioned how Seung-min has the softest voice in the entire group, but IN also has a soft voice. But they're soft in different ways. While Seung-min, I said, has sort of a nasally soft voice, IN's soft voice is just higher pitched.
창빈이 형이 기존에 적었던 랩 파트들을 싹 다 걷어내고 멜로디로 다 만들어내가지고 저만의 할루시네이션이 탄생했습니다. 원래는 랩이 되게 많은 곡이었어요. 언젠간 데모도 들으실 거예요.
And you can barely hear his voice underneath the music. So I think for beginning learners, it might be more difficult to understand IN than Seung-min or some of the other members because of his soft voice. And I have a few more clips.
거절을 막 단호하게 하는 편은 아닌데 좀 돌려서 거절하는 편인 것 같아요. 뭐 예를 들면은 오늘 운동하러 가자. 오늘 나 어디 한다. 난 근데 오늘 어디를 해서 오늘 같이 이 운동 못 할 것 같다. 미안하다. 영화를 보러 갈 겁니다. 오늘 그 영화 보려고요. 프리가이? 회사를 잠깐 가려고 합니다. 할 것도 있고 그냥 갑자기 숙소 있다가 노래 부르고 싶어가지고 노래를 잠깐 부르고 오려고 합니다.
Now, normally if someone has a soft voice, I would just recommend turning up the volume so you can hear them better, and then there won't be any problem. In fact, IN's voice is also a bit high already, which would normally make this a non-issue. But something that he also does at the same time is that he slightly mumbles his syllables.
오늘은 가족여행을 갑니다. 목적지는 경주.
And he sounds perfectly clear whenever he's excited or laughing, but when he's relaxed, which is a lot of the time, he does tend to slightly mumble. So he's not moving his lips enough, specifically with his consonants, so it can make him a bit more difficult to understand without Korean subtitles.
쇼를 끝내고 이제 호텔로 돌아갑니다. 너무너무 재밌었고 또 이렇게 스테이가 많이 와주니까 굉장히 든든하네요.
Note though that he's not hard to understand for a Korean speaker at all. I'm just noting this because I know most of you watching aren't yet fluent in Korean.
시간 약속이나 부지런함에 있어서는 다른 멤버들이 그래도 이 부분은 못 이기지 않을까 하는 생각? 그 형도 약간 계획이 있으면 그 계획 짠 대로 해야 되는 성격이어가지고 그런 부분은 진짜 저랑 완전 딱딱 잘 맞는 것 같아요.
I really like his soft, slightly mumbling voice because I think it matches with his more mature personality. So this is really just a note, it's not a criticism. But again, whenever he's excited or laughing, he speaks more clearly. So anytime that you see him giving an interview, he sounds perfectly clear and there is no mumbling. And here are a few examples.
김치볶음밥 해주고 싶어요. 또 김치볶음밥 맵게 잘하거든요. 지옥을 맛보라고. 저는 한이 형 곡을 되게 좋아하는 사람이라 굉장히 녹음도 기대가 되는 것 같습니다.
고기 먹방을 앞두고 행복해하는 모습이네요. 굉장히 행복해 보이네요. 첫입이 참 맛있겠다. 네, 상추 요청했습니다. 또 삼겹살에 상추가 빠지면 안 되니까요.
But otherwise, most of the time his voice is so soft, I would just recommend turning up the volume whenever it's only him. In this next clip, even their editor had to increase the volume, and you can hear how loud some of the noise in the background got, just so that they can make it so you could hear his voice.
내가 아는 사람 중에 가장 강한 사람이다. 일단 멘탈적인 것도 그렇고 마음이 단단한 것 같아요.
So that's the only small challenge that you might have if you're using him for listening practice. As long as he's not using dialect, that is.
한번 드셔보시죠. 먼저 본연의 맛 한번 느끼고 먹어줘야 되는 겁니다.
그치. 형이 고기 먹는 방법을 그대로 알구나.
사실 안 되겠네. 잘 먹습니다. 가보겠습니다.
이제 어디 가나? 그 치워져 있어. 이제 어디 가나?
He and Bangtan are both being goofy and speaking in Busan dialect, and even if you don't know any of the words in the dialect, you can still tell because there's a different intonation. And here's another clip of Bangtan saying something in standard Korean, followed by IN saying the same expression using Busan dialect.
자기야 뭐행?
오, 좋아, 잘했어. 자, 아이엔 씨.
네. 자기야, 니 뭐하노?
너무 멋있다.
First, Bangchan said 자기야, 뭐행? Meaning, what are you doing, baby? And the ending heng is just adding the consonant iang, the circle letter to the end, and it's a kind of a cutesy style of speaking. And then in says it as 자기야, 니 뭐하노? Meaning the same thing, but in dialect. The ending no is a dialect verb ending which is used when asking questions. Now, the type of dialect he's using is Gyeongsang dialect, which is used throughout the whole Gyeongsang province and includes cities like Busan and Daegu and many more. And each city has its own unique characteristics, but they all have several similarities, and one of those is a more rugged type of intonation. So the intonation will go up and down much faster than in other areas of Korea, and also the pronunciation of certain letters will be more relaxed, especially the vowels o and o, the diphthongs, as well as the consonant siot, which is the S letter. And because these letters aren't pronounced as clearly, it can be a bit difficult to understand if you don't already understand the context. Now, imagine how hard it was for me when I was a beginner to not only barely understand Korean, but to understand this dialect even less. Anyway, while the majority of the time in is not using any dialect, it also wasn't hard to find examples where he does. Here's a clip where he's trying to speak standard Korean, but it still sometimes comes out as dialect.
안녕하세요. 저 블루베리 스무디 한 잔 주세요.
안녕하세요. 저 블루베리 스무디. 이거 안 되는 거야?
여기 들어가.
그냥 자동으로 그냥 사투리가 나오네.
But also remember that he no longer lives in Busan, so most of the time he's not speaking with any dialect. And in that same clip, he also has a hard time trying to imitate Busan intonation, so he's trying to say the expression 이거 어디까지 올라가는 거예요?
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 이거 어디까지 올라가는 거예요? 안 돼.
설마
이거
뭐지?
이거 어디까지 안 되는데?
이거 어디까지 올라가는 거예요?
이거 부산말.
이거 어디까지 올라가는 거예요?
이거 어디까지 올라가는 거예요?
맞아.
This is a kind of a meme expression, but it's also how the intonation can sometimes sound in Busan dialect. And in is able to do this barely, but it doesn't come out naturally for him since it's a bit more extreme. He also talks about this sometimes, and I have a clip where he says that he's actually not really able to speak dialect when he tries to, that it's not something that he can just start doing, and he can only use it when it's more like natural, when it just comes out.
찐 사투리 쓰는 거 보여달라고요? 찐 사투리 쓰는 거? 어떻게 보여줘야 되지? 이래 하면 되나? 이래 하면 되나? 그러니까 스테이도 립밤 잘 바르고 댕기고 알겠지? 왜 이렇게 어색하냐? 아니 이게 자연스럽게 나와야지 이게 시키면 잘 안 된다니까.
He doesn't use dialect as thick as other people from Busan who've lived there their entire life for decades, nor is it as difficult to understand when he does use it, but I can still hear his dialect in the background. And although he's not using dialect in 99% of cases, he does, however, use it often when he's with his family, especially when they're in Busan. And a fan asked him during a live stream if he uses dialect with his family, and he replies that yes, not only does he use dialect with them, but he also texts in dialect with them.
가족들이랑 톡할 때도 사투리 쓰냐고? 사투리 텍스트로 적는지 궁금해. 네, 맞아요. 사투리 써요. 뭐 예를 들면 이제 서울에서는 텍스트로 뭐 이게 이렇게 돼야지 하면은 그래? 이렇게 하면은 부산 사람들끼리는 맞나? 이런 식으로 약간 텍스트로 이렇게 적고 거의 다 네, 텍스트도 부산 사투리 쓰는 것 같아요.
So if you want to learn dialect from him, I highly recommend checking out any videos he filmed where he's with his family, since most of what he's saying will be dialect. Although, not so much when he's with the other members. And here's Han trying to say something, and In replying in dialect. So I wanted to take this opportunity to teach you just a little bit of what to look out for in Busan dialect. And the first thing is the expression he uses here, 모라카노, which I think is the most famous expression from Busan ever. Also notice the intonation here. This is a common type of intonation in Busan where it goes up for the entire word and then down at the very last syllable, 모라카노. Now, that's not the intonation for every sentence. There's a lot of variation in Busan too, but that's the classic Busan intonation used in many expressions. And now to learn just a few more notes, let's look at a few clips where he's with his family, starting with the verb ending no.
잘 찍고 있는지 모르겠다. 어떻게 끊어?
This one was said by his brother, and it's used at the end of a verb stem whenever you're asking a question. But it's used specifically when you're asking a question about who, what, where, when, or why. And for other questions where you're asking for more information, you would instead use the verb ending na.
찍고 있나?
Here he asks, 찍고 있나? And you can hear that same intonation too, but for each separate part of the sentence. Okay, next is another common ending used when you want to emphasize something a lot, and that's the ending 다이가.
이 내보고 막 옷 입혀달라고 막 그랬다. 내가? 내가 언제? 그랬다.
This ending is made by taking the plain form of a verb. So the verb 하다 would become 한다 normally, and you would change it into 한다 아이가, 한다이가. And this just sounds a bit stronger when you're trying to make a point. Okay, the next ending is similar, but that's just the regular plain form ending.
굳이 1타라가 필요한가 싶어가지고 나 1타라 못 사겠다. 너무 비싸 1타라.
You can hear him use this where he says 너무 비싸다.
나 1타라 못 사겠다. 너무 비싸 1타라.
This ending ta is also used normally in standard Korean, but in dialect it has a stronger feel to it, so you'll hear it more often. Other things though to pay attention to are the word ni for you and ne for I or me. And you can hear him using ni several times in one of the previous clips too.
니는 별로라고 말할 자격이 없다. 니 내보고 막 옷 입혀달라고 막 그랬다. 내가?
And if you want to learn more about this dialect, I've made a few other videos on my channel as well as some of their differences with other dialects, so you can check those out if you're interested. But most of the time, he's not using that many dialect words. It's really just that intonation combined with his naturally soft voice.
떡볶이를 별로 안 좋아해서 이 떡볶이가 싫어진 이유가 떡볶이는 먹으면은 뺏기가 너무 힘들다. 에너지가 저장이 너무 빠르게 돼가지고 떡볶이가.
Okay, so that's enough about his dialect. Now let's talk briefly, very briefly, about his usage of filler words. IN also doesn't use that many filler words overall. He uses them here and there a bit more than Seungmin does, but it's not that excessive, and mostly he's also very concise when he speaks. So just one more reason that he sounds so mature. But I did find a few filler words that he likes to use, so let's start with the first one.
자, 이제 다 적었는데 두 칸이 공백이에요. 이제 두 칸은 말이죠. 그럼 저는 이제 가보도록 하겠습니다. 오늘도 제 라이브 봐주셔서 감사하고 또 이제
The filler word he's using is 이제, which means now, but it's used as a filler to mean like so now or and now. And he doesn't use it that much, but if I had to pick a favorite filler word for him, it would be this one. Okay, next one.
수육을 너무 좋아하게 됐어요. 근데 꽂힌 음식이 너무 많은데 제가 최근에 수육을 너무 좋아하게 돼서 너무 추워요. 영하 12도 말이 되냐? 너무 추워. 너무 춥다고. 거의 진짜 너무 추울 때 하면 진짜 잘하는데 너무 추워서 그 다음에 또 칙칙등도 하고 너무 잘하더라고요. 춤을 다 너무 잘 춰. 눈썹 뒤색 때 모자도 같이 뒤색거리는 건 너무 귀엽다. 축하해줘서 너무너무 고맙고. 네, 아직까지 제 생일입니다. 너무 바빠가지고 제가 너무 늦었네요. 요새 이쁜 운동화가 너무 많다고. 맞아, 요새 이쁜 운동화가 너무 많아. 왜 이쁜 신발은 계속 나오는 걸까요? 내 마음이 너무 힘들어. 키 안 뚫냐고요? 안 뚫어요. 너무 귀찮아. 관리해야 되는 게 너무 귀찮을 것 같아요. 너무 이거 내 입을 내가 해봐라. 너무 부끄럽네. 너무 그래가지고 너무 부끄러워가지고 별거 아닐 수 있는 날에 이렇게
특별한 날로 이렇게 만들어 주셔서 너무너무 감사하고 항상.
This word is 너무, and it literally means too much, but in conversational speech, it just means so much or so. And it's a really common word even when it's not being used as a filler word. Okay, and the last one.
네, 굉장히 귀엽게 꾸며져 있습니다. 네, 복신이가 햄버거가 됐는데 굉장히 귀엽습니다. 힘이 굉장히 잘 받더라고요. 난 고민이 굉장히 많아져가지고 굉장히 맛있는 음식들을 구워서를 굉장히 좋아하시거든요.
음성이기 때문에 굉장히 건조하기 때문에.
So he also likes using the word 굉장히, which means extremely or so. And this is also used in the same way as 너무, but it has a lot more emphasis. And that's about it for his filler words, at least what stood out to me. Okay, though, before we go, I want to take a quick look at his handwriting. And I thought since IN is the youngest member, it would be interesting to see how he writes letters to members who are different ages as him. So first, here's a note that he wrote to the oldest member, 방찬.
든든하게 제 옆에 있어줘요.
And although it's polite, he uses the yo form at the end of all of his sentences. It's not stiff sounding. In fact, the very first thing that he wrote is hi yo, which is just a cutesy way of saying hi to an older friend, but it's still like half polite. And as far as the writing goes, he writes consistently and has a clear style. It looks like someone who does a lot of writing because all of his syllables are similar sizes, and most of all, it looks straight. It's kind of like halfway between writing each letter one at a time and doing cursive. And you can see that he writes by connecting each letter in his syllables with the next one. And you can see that especially where he wrote 고마워요 and the last two syllables 워요, which are written without lifting the marker. So I can tell that he writes more quickly in a few parts. He actually does switch into cursive in some parts. So if you see someone who has cursive in some places and separate letters in other places, it's probably IN's writing. But let's see another note to see if there's anything else we can learn. This is a note he wrote to Han, who's just a year older than him, but technically in the middle of the group as far as their ages go. And I can see more of that same type of writing. Everything is neat, but here and there, I can also see some cursive, especially where he writes toward the bottom, 동경하는, and those syllables are written in more of a cursive style, as well as the very last line where he writes 앞으로도. The 으로 part also is cursive style. I also really like that he drew a little alien at the bottom to represent Han and then wrote, "This is you when you're eating food." Also, notice that while the last note to 방찬 was more polite with the yo form everywhere, this letter is much more casual, except for the very first line, which also starts with 하요. The rest of these sentences are all just using casual speech, and he even uses the 다 ending, which I mentioned can be common in dialect, like where he writes 다 해본다, and then a smiley face. Or there's another sentence here which ends with 좋다. And the last sentence also ends with casual speech. He says 음악해줘 without a yo at the end. Okay, but let's look at one more note, this time to Seung-min.
그리고 캠핑 오래 못해도 한 번은 가자. Bye.
This one's harder to read because he wrote it with a green marker for some reason, which I'm positive the producers threw away after filming this. But if we look closely, there's still some info we can get. I rewrote what it says on the screen, so hopefully you should be able to read along. First, there's no yo form. It's all in completely casual speech, and he even uses some more casual endings like 지내자꾸나 instead of 지내자, which is an older style of Korean grammar and sounds humorous. And then the end, he ends by just saying bye, which is very casual, like saying see ya. Now, if I saw this letter before the others, I would think that his handwriting was horrible. But in this case, I placed the blame solely on that horrible green pen that he was using. So I can still see some of the same traits here. His letters are really clean and separated, and he spaced everything nicely. So yeah, it looks really nice. Okay, and I could keep going on, but I think that's enough for today.
재밌었어요.
And wow, we made it. 8 full episodes. That is my complete analysis of all members in the group Stray Kids. If you enjoyed this video series, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more Korean language content. Thanks again to my Patreon supporters and my YouTube channel members for making this entire series possible. Please check out my Patreon page in the video description if you'd like to support my channel. And you can also get some cool benefits like Korean cheat sheets, study guides, vocabulary decks, and more. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!